Alright, let me spell it out for you. The Bible is one big story, a story about God and his epic plan. In each part of the Bible, each small story tells us a bit more about this big story. Like a story within a bigger story, a narrative within a bigger narrative, a meta-narrative, if you will. So here we go. Let's start at the beginning, the very beginning. There was God. It was great. Then boom, God created the heavens and the earth. He put plants and trees of many kinds. He created the sun, the moon, the creatures of the sea, the birds, creatures on the land, and it was good. But he wasn't done. He said, I will create people and I will make them like me. And so he did, and he put them in charge of all the things he had made, and it was very good. So then he chilled. So, first human was Adam, and he was loving life in the garden that God had put him in. He wanted to give Adam a choice, to obey him or not. So he placed a tree in the garden. This tree was no ordinary tree, because eating it would give Adam the knowledge of what was good and evil. And God said, don't eat it. It'll be bad. Seriously. You'll have to be separated from me. So Adam was like, okay. So, to cut it short, Adam needed a helper. The animals sucked at being helpers. So he made Eve, the first woman, out of Adam's rib, for some reason. And Adam was like, hey there, lady. And they were both naked and loving it. Then a serpent said to Adam, hey, it'd be awesome if you eat that fruit. I'm pretty sure God didn't say anything bad would happen. And she was like, it's pretty shiny. So she was like, okay. And she gave some to Adam to eat, and he was like, why not? Then God decided to walk through the garden. Adam and Eve freaked out, and so they realized they were naked, and that was awkward. He knew what had happened, but he decided to troll them, and was like, where are you? Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent, and the snake was like, I'm a snake, I can't talk to God. God cursed the snake and promised that on the day there would be a person who would crush the serpent, crush his head, and once and for all, and dealing with all the problems it caused. But people had disobeyed God, and so they had to cop the punishment, being kicked out of the garden and having to suffer a life that would have a lot of pain and suffering in it. Some say this account of events, of how things came to be, is a literal account. It's exactly how it happened, and that's exactly how things came to be. Another popular belief is that, in fact, it was a metaphor, a poem that gives an impression of creation, but is not literally how it came to be. And there wasn't really an Adam and Eve. They didn't really exist, but they represent man's fall. This idea offers a way where scientific evidence for evolution doesn't contradict the Bible. But I'll let you decide which one is right. So back to the story, because it's not over yet. God hadn't yet separated Adam and Eve from himself like he said would happen. He had a bigger plan, a plan bigger than the mistakes of Adam and Eve, a plan to make things as good as they were before, a plan to pay for the mistakes that they and every human would make. They awaited the serpent crusher. Alright, time to speed things up. A lot of people on Earth now, and all of them are doing evil in the eyes of God, except for one guy, Noah. So he's like, Noah, build me a boat. Big one. Because I'm going to flood the earth to destroy these people, but I want you and your family to survive. Also take some animals so they can survive, and also so you won't starve. 2 of every kind, if you could. So Noah did it, and it rained. The earth flooded, and when Noah was back on dry land, he made a promise to Noah. A covenant, like a contract. God would bless him if he obeyed some laws. So he promised to never destroy the earth with a flood again. Remember covenant. The word covenant. 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 It's important, because these contracts are the vehicle God uses in his epic plan to save all people. So sometime later, people were back to their evil ways. They tried to make a tower. They said, let's get to heaven. They were trying to get back to God, back to how it was before. But God was like, no dice, and gives them all different languages so they can't understand each other, and the tower fails. Sometime later, a guy called Abram comes along. God made a covenant with him. Remember, covenant. That contract? Well, by this time, the concept of a covenant was pretty common, and Abram would have been pretty familiar with it. There are a few different types. The one in this case is a covenant where a king or ruler creates a covenant where he sets the terms and the people obey. So, the covenant to Abraham was that even though he was old, and so was his wife, that he would have children, and his descendants would be heaps. In fact, there would be an entire nation, a whole country. They would have a land for themselves, and through them, every nation would be blessed. The condition was that they keep the laws God had set out for them. Not such a big deal, right? Nope, you're wrong. From this nation would come the serpent crusher we've been waiting for. Also, God changed Abram's name to Abraham at some point. So, the nation is now called the Hebrews, and soon they got pretty big. And they were living in Egypt, and the king was like, too many Hebrews. They could cause him trouble, so he enslaved them, and he commanded his soldiers to kill all their baby boys. Yeah, I know. But a boy called Moses was saved by his parents by sending him down a river in a basket. The king's daughter found him and raised him. But he runs away after a while. God uses a bush that was on fire to talk to him. God tells him to go back and save the Hebrews and be their leader. But when he returns, the king won't budge. And so God sends a bunch of plagues to make the king listen. So the last plague kills a lot of the Egyptians, but the Hebrews were not hurt. Later on, this event would be celebrated by this nation and is still today. The king gives in and lets the Hebrews go, but he changes his mind after they leave. Moses parts an entire sea with God's power so they can escape. God gives the nation Israel laws to live by and to make a covenant with them. Obey the laws, and they will be of all nations treasured by God. but they disobeyed anyway, and Moses cracks it. They set off to the land God promised Abraham way back. They get to the promised land, but realize they have to fight for it. They get scared and lose faith in God. God makes them wander in the desert for 40 years because of it. When they finally return, Moses dies just before they get there, and Joshua becomes the new leader. They trusted God and conquered the land, and it became their home. So God fulfilled his covenant to Abraham. But still, where is the serpent crusher? This is good and all, but it is still not the Garden of Eden. So Israel goes into a spiral of disobeying God and things going bad for them. Then Israel pleads with God for help, and God sends them a judge to help them back on track. But every time Israel starts disobeying again, and he sends another judge to get them back. But every time it seems Israel just fall away again. None of the judges seem to be enough. None of them are the serpent crusher. Then Israel were like, hey, other countries have kings to rule over them. We have just judges. Can we have one, please? God's like, the king you'll get will suck. You don't want this. And they're like, no, we want it. So he gives them the king. Surprise! He sucks. The name of this new king is Saul. He intended to obey God, but in the end, he underestimated how important it was to do what God wanted and ended up being a terrible king. But then came a great king, a king called David. As a boy, he killed a giant called Goliath with a rock and a sling because he trusted God. And he did very well in obeying God and leading Israel. Wow, could this be the serpent crusher we've been waiting for? Nope. He still made some pretty crappy decisions. Fell for a girl that was another man's wife and had the guy killed. Though he asked God to forgive him, he clearly wasn't a perfect guy and could not be the one that would finally bring God's people back to him. His son Solomon was super wise, but also fell for the ladies, and at the end of his life, he turned to fake gods. God's like, you noob, I'm going to take the kingdom from you. Jeroboam, Jerry, rebels against Solomon, and so Solomon makes him flee to Egypt. When Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam, Ray, is a bit of a jerk, and the people are like, can you please be less of a jerk? And he's like, nope, and he makes it hard for them, so the people rebelled. Jerry returns from Egypt, and most of the tribes of Israel join him. Only the tribe called Judah stays loyal to Ray, because he is part of the tribe of Judah. The whole nation is split into two, Israel and Judah. They had different land, different capitals, they also had different kings. God said to both nations, if they would obey, they would be the nation that the serpent crusher would come from. But the kings of Israel were terrible. None of them followed God's lead. In fact, most of them made the entire nation go further and further away from God, making them do terrible things and turning them to fake gods. God sent many prophets to warn them of the consequences of disobedience and to plead with them to return to God. Finally, because of this rebellion, Israel was wiped out. The kings of Judah were a bit better. They had bad kings, but also had many great kings, and did as God asked them. But in the end, they too fell, and despite the work of the prophets that were sent to them. But they were not wiped out. The king of Judah at the time was Joachim. He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and so Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem, Judah's capital. They took all the people, except the poorest, back to Babylon, along with the city's treasures. Years later, the new king Nebuchadnezzar had appointed to be in charge of Jerusalem also rebelled, and so this time, Nebuchadnezzar took even more of the people to Babylon and burned Jerusalem to the ground. The people of Judah were now all that is left of Israel, and are mostly living in Babylon, away from the land promised to them by God through Abraham. They longed to return, but God told them to be content and stay in the land. A new king of Babylon, Cyrus, was moved by God to let Israelites go back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, but only a few decided to return. You see, Babylon was the center of the world at the time. It was a place of beauty and culture and wealth, and even enjoyed religious freedom. Cyrus was a very successful king. He conquered many nations, and knew the best way to grow his nation was to treat it well. This made it exceedingly hard for the Israelites to tear themselves away. Many of them had never even seen the land they were longing to return to, and Babylon was a very attractive place. They returned and rebuilt the temple. Ezra led people to return to Jerusalem with the blessing of the Babylonian king. But just when it looked like things were looking up, the people decided to stop rebuilding the city walls in order to make homes for themselves, and left the wall still half built. Jeremiah arrived and was distraught at the situation, and led the people back to the task. And so Jerusalem was rebuilt, and Israel was a nation again. They had learned their lesson from their exile and continued to follow God. Things were pretty peachy, but still, this was not the perfect relationship with God like it was back in the beginning. Where is the serpent crusher? For 400 years, God's people waited. And then he arrived. The one that would finally restore the relationship between God and all the people all over the earth. The one that would fulfill the covenant God had made. Who is the serpent crusher? Well, pick up the New Testament, because that's what it's all about. Spoiler, it's Jesus.